Welcome everyone, Dr. Thor here. Get ready for Christ consciousness. Well, here's my latest review on another Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aquino book, which is as with all his books, are kind of strange. He thinks that he is a genius, he's figured everything out, and he's basically a very pseudo-intellectual. He thinks he's intellectual, but he really isn't. He doesn't really come up with anything new or unusual. And of course, being where he comes from, which is a badge getter, a Eagle Scout of high notes, and of course a military officer where, hey, do what you're told and shut up and make sure you have all the credentials. Is very interesting because he considers Satanism to be the ultimate free-thinking path of personal responsibility. Yet he's in an industry that you do what you're told regardless of it. So, as with everything else with Aquino, he is a very much of an actual contradiction. Now, this book's ILLUMIINANX, is that the exact title, is another one of his ridiculous books talking about things which he mixes fantasy, other people's opinions, etc. in. So, it gets to be a little ridiculous. But let's go over it. This really is a book about the ILLUMIINANX, Rosicrucianism Reawakened. And apparently he wants to tell the Rosicrucians what to do, particularly the Rosicrucians which are based in San Rafael, I believe it is, in Northern California, who have had a great little institute there for many years. I've never been there. I always wanted to go to, but I never found Rosicrucianism to be very profound. And they have kind of a bad history of being, from what I understood, or someone told me, I haven't been able to confirm it, that, throughout the organization's history, which I guess is true, there's been a lot of bad people involved that have stolen money and everything else. But the bottom line is that they got this beautiful temple there, a park, meditation facilities. This is pretty rare, and it is open to the public or for a small fee if you become a Rosicrucian. I got turned off to the Rosicrucians, even though I find their stuff interesting at a certain level. When I got one of their monographs and they were talking about Joseph and Mary and Jesus, and I said, really, is that the level you're on? If you get involved in the mythology of others, a mythology that has been proven to be bogus, well, what are you doing here? And if I want to learn about Christianity and that kind of aspect, I will get it from the Christians. So when I got that information, I found total disgust with them and moved away. Now, with almost every tradition out there, you can find good information. There's good techniques, there's little things you can find, but you got to be smart enough to cut off all the fat and get down to the meat. You don't need a bunch of fat. The fat is there to give flavoring. It's there to give bulk. But you've got to know what's the good meat and not, and cut away the waste, because you don't need that. That's actually toxic. So the Amorc people have been around for a long time, and they still are running large ads, and I guess they have a fairly large following of people that follow their systems and pay them monthly. So, and they're able to put together this big institute which has been there for many times. But, this is a holdover from the glory days when people with money used to support organizations like this as well. So I guess they're doing okay. I haven't really checked into it. I'm not sure that really matters. But for some reason or another, this Nazi who seems to love Nazi memorabilia, Nazi everything, and hold their system in high esteem. Frankly, as a military officer, what could you expect differently? And thinks that that's such a great way, and has a Nazi magical group of people in the Trapezoid Order, run by Edred Thorson, otherwise known as Edred Flowers, and thought that there was so much great power there. He claims to even have the dagger from the psychotic murdering freak, Himmler, who he treasures as a great energetic tool. So we've got problems here when you're this warped. So how does he interpret anything? And we do have to keep that in mind as a bigger picture. This is the problem with Aquino, and while you listen to him and he is basically what appears to be a balanced person seeking an alternative path, the problem is when you get involved in alternative paths that have horrible labels. You got to remember, for 10 years, he was madly in love with the Church of Satan, really a very base, ignorant organization that never really offered anything. The Satanic Bible is nothing more than a book that was copied from everybody. Redbeard book from 1895 is what most of the opening was. He just took that verbatim and put it in the Bible, and then he put other stuff from magical traditions there as well. So there really isn't much in there. And to quote that Anton LaVey was such a great actual thinker and was involved in all this. I have no idea. I really don't have any idea, but certainly he produced virtually nothing. His Bible, so-called Bible, is nothing but a rehashed nonsense, just like the original book of the Bible, just a bunch of thrown together stuff. His other books are more, I think, ritual-based. I never read them, the Satanic Witch and all the other things that's out there that was there. None of these did too well after the Satanic Bible. After the Satanic Bible, which was a big hit and probably one of the most stolen books out there, and I guess if you're a Satanist, you would be happy of that. Going against the system, why pay money? And this is, of course, the reason what killed the church itself was the fact that it really didn't generate any kind of money you could live off of. And he was forced to really sell out. And Michael Aquino decided he didn't want to go along with that, with his big military officer's paycheck and mommy's money. He didn't really care and wasn't too interested in finding better ways. And apparently, Mr. Big Shot, who was such a good friend with Anton, was unable to actually properly help monetize the organization. Why would he care? He just wanted to get another badge. And this is the problem with Aquino. It's also the fact that he thinks he knows everything, which he knows very little, and has kind of a very childlike mind of what's going to change things out there. And this gets us into so many fields. But I don't want to labor too much on him. I'm going to be having more information on him that I have uncovered, etc. And of course, remember, people, and all those listening to me that get the information that they repeat on their shows because they ain't got no research and they don't read nothing. Well, you're going to get it from me, people, straight from the horse's mouth. Someone who knows when someone talks about something like Rosicrucianism or Satanism or anything else that goes with it, knows what he's talking about, instead of some goofball born-again Christian who's trying to fulfill his already established beliefs. The worst thing that an actual researcher can do, you have to be neutral and you have to go against your own personal prejudices. Very important. So he calls this ILLUMIINANX, Rosicrucianism Reawakened. And basically this book, and there's lots of sidelines. He starts off with some and everything promotes his same philosophy, and I'll get into that in a minute. He's got this same philosophy, which is really kind of boring and not really profound, but of course that's everything to do with the Temple of Set. I've read many of their books, Don Webb, etc., Edred Thorson's books, Flowers, who basically has copied word for word, I allege, from German runic books. I mean, he's even set up the chapters identical. They're just copies, which is so typical of Satanism. Also, the fact is that there's nothing new here. They're parrots. They find something and they just parrot it. They really don't come to any conclusions, and you can find that very true with Aquino because all he does is quote other people's belief systems. This concept from Nietzsche, that concept from Kant. You know, it's a pseudo-intellectual way of trying to give your literature more value by quoting people who are thought to have a brain. Now, I don't have any use for any of these people, including the ancient philosophers from Greece as well. It's a new world. It's a new time. We know so much more. Now, are these guiding stones? Are they intellectual stimulations? Yes. Are they relevant to this day and age? Absolutely not. The world is different. We know a lot more, and they knew nothing. To think that we should follow people from the 1800s or even from ancient Greece more than just a guiding stone or intellectual stimuli is insulting to everyone. But that's why society never gets anywhere. They keep looking back over their shoulder and keep running into walls. Now, you don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. Use these for stimuli. So, whatever. So the whole idea is that, but he starts off, and so now he seems to have this connection to Egyptian because he started this. Now, he got into Set as a god because he wanted to get away from the Judeo-Christian problem, which is the fact that Satan and Lucifer are evil. And this is something that the Church of Satan fought from day one. If you're going to use that terminology, no matter what you're selling, you got to turn people off because it's not what something means. It's what the modern interpretation of it is, meaning everybody knows that Lucifer and Satan are the same people and they are bad. They are evil. And, you go back, it actually means this, or some boob-headed parapsychologist. Well, all the old gods were turned into demons. So once one conquered... Well, to a large extent, yes, that is true. And it is true that they were demons. If you were fighting somebody and they believed in Gakamuka, and this god was someone that murdered your fellow people and was there to conquer and torture you, cut the heads off, blew the eyes out of your people and your friends, that's okay. They're nice gods. This is the kind of ridiculousness and trash you get from these pseudo-intellectual, dangerous people who indirectly even... give Satanism a big plus. Parapsychologist, man. So the whole idea is that we run into those things out there constantly. But this is shallow thinking. But when you go to Dumbademia, that's what they do. They give you old, crappy books, and you can't fight that. Well, it's been around for 1,000 years, that boy. So it must be good. Everybody says it's good. So it's the whole idea, and of course that's why the world is where it is today. And it ain't good. It has little value. We need to go to the next level. Now, so when we get into this stuff, he decides to start off with his usual nonsense. He is, of course, he goes right into what all these Satanists seem to love. Fantasy. And particularly Lovecraft. H.P. Lovecraft, the noted anti-occultist who worked with Houdini and wrote a book for Houdini that occultism was garbage and crap and evil. Yeah, that's the same guy. Well, no, he really knew. He had ancient books. It's all made up. The Necronomicon is a fake book. It doesn't exist, even though apparently there are some ancient texts that use that name. Which were magical books. But what he's talking about doesn't exist, as well as his group of god forms and spirits that he made up for his horror books. They're not occult books, by the way, people. There's a difference between horror and occult, or even fictionalized occult. So these were horror books, and people just seem to love Lovecraft. I personally don't like his writings, don't find them interesting, personally, but that's my personal taste. I've only read a little bit of his, and I don't really want to read fiction. I don't need to read his fiction either. Life is fictional enough. We don't need to get further into all this kind of nonsense that's out there that perpetrated. But he goes in there, and he was like, he bought, which of course is kind of amusing that he bought a certificate for the Dagon initiate program through Wasatoka, what is that organization? That's been out there for years. That gives you bogus things into bogus orders. Order of Dagon. So, which of course, and there are people that write entire books on this. When I originally got into occultism, the Necronomicon was still very popular. Simon's Necronomicon in particular, which is really, we know is completely contrived. It's a good little book. Published by the late Herman Slater's Magical Child organization. And people use these sigils and things in there and then tried to back it up by using a fantasy lying book, which I don't know if he ever said it was fact or not. I don't think he did. He wrote fiction, and then people say, well, it's really not fiction. It's amazing how people make up stories even when the people state that, hey, this is not real. So the whole idea, and I'm not sure what is real or not, you certainly can make your own thought form up and kind of empower it. But if we're looking for actual energies out there, these are totally contrived by a guy who was pretty much a freak on top of it. H.P. Lovecraft was an odd, strange guy. I believe he was a virgin until he was 35. Don't keep me exact on those figures. But he was a strange guy. And apparently was not into occultism whatsoever. He did not meet Aleister Crowley. And I don't know why Crowley would be important or not. You meet somebody for 10 minutes, have a couple of meetings, have a couple of dinners with him. Does that mean anything? I don't think so. But he was a fervent anti-occultist and thought it was all crap and used to have dinner with Houdini, who was out there and literally spent millions of dollars attacking occultists, investigating them, and creating fake occultists, unmasking frauds, etc. Like the whole world isn't a fraud. So these people were, whether you think it's bad or not, I'm not really sure. I don't think that if you contact a past relative and that gives you some sort of better feeling about life in general and feel like, here's someone who's passed that you love and you contacted them and things are better now, that it is in any way necessarily wrong. I mean, don't you get false illusions from everybody else? You go to a doctor and you expect cures when you get death. I mean, we have the results of their medicine. It's called a graveyard. Or anybody else who lies to you. Does your religion give you anything? Really? Is God helping anybody? Is there any wars that have been averted? Is somebody praying on the front lines as the bullet sails to his skull and blows it apart and pops like a balloon? Yes, but he was in contemplative thought to his God. So all of this is, so I don't know, I'm not sure there's anything wrong with that whatsoever. Matter of fact, I don't think there's anything wrong with any of these people. People who are looking for hope, I don't believe in hope or fear. There's reality, but the point is most people need it. So H.P. Lovecraft, and the fact that this pseudo-intellectual wants to tell us and thinks this is amusing, and of course he thinks this is funny, and he claims that in his other books that basically he's a combination of Mad Magazine and Horror Magazine, which I find a strange way of looking at things. But he likes the comical, and he thinks that's funny, I guess along with all the little badges he got in the Boy Scouts. So the Esoteric Order of Dagon, he's got his little, and he puts this in his book. He's got an actual picture of it here. Ooh, that's nice. So the whole idea is all these things that go with it is from the Misatonkic. There's Misatonkic University. They've been around for many, many years. I'm not sure what they're in. They sell different grimoires and other things. But, they're into fantasy. And if you're going to do that, well, then it's endless. I mean, you might as well just get pictures of Donald Duck, make him a god, and Minnie and Mickey, the underlings of that, and pray to them. Now, you can create energies there, but you got to remember these are base energies. They're not connected to streams of higher empowerment for this particular thing. But I won't get into that. It is very interesting. So the Amorc, A-M-O-R-C, and these, as I mentioned, they're in San Jose, California, and they have this cool little center there. As I said, I haven't personally seen it. He has pictures of their temples and other things, and they're quite impressive from what I can see. And this is a place that has a great library, places to go and study, things that basically people with these interests are always kind of seeking, because there is no place to go. There's never any place to go. There aren't really very many centers around. Most of them tend to be spiritually based, whether it's yogic or yogi Portuguese or Eastern, etc. So there's not too many places that are mystical and also Western based. And of course, they kind of are, even though they're very connected to Judeo-Christian. What is interesting, I don't know if that was mentioned in this book or not, but the right and left-hand path, and of course they are right-handed path, are basically the, which is in modern times is considered the positive path. The left-hand path is considered the negative path. And left hand generally has never been used through society until recently because that was the hand you used to clean your bottom. So if you use your left hand, you're unclean. Now, others have stated this comes from Blavatsky, the strange, weird sexual deviant that she was, coming from her very traditional German background. That is connected to her. She was completely asexual, hated sex, refused to, was married to this Blavatsky person, but refused to have sex with him. So all of that stuff. So she was a nutcase and smoked cigarettes consistently, was dirty and filthy, very typical of what you find in a typical German. So the whole idea is that you will find that as a cultural problem. So she claimed that the left-hand path was negative because this is connected to Tantra. Now, he's also a person who studied in India, Blavatsky, and didn't even have anything on yoga, never learned yoga or anything there. So she just learned one particular mysticism. And the tantric mysticism that she learned from is that if you were going to, if there was a sexual ritual going on, you sat on the left-hand side of a person, and if it was going to be regular, it was the right-hand side, to kind of boil it down quickly. So this was equated as being evil from her screwed up, evil, messed up, confused, lying mind that she put together, her very badly put together garbage book that she wrote. And all of her books are really pretty bad. You can't really find it. It's just another contriving of information that she found, just for a side note. But what's even stranger with him, so he thinks he's a big Egyptian file now because he decided to go over to Set because that somehow alleviates the Judeo-Christian. I guess he didn't understand that Egypt is in the Middle East, otherwise known as being part of the Judeo-Christian tradition, if not directly, indirectly. There's a huge Coptic order of Christians there. So he doesn't quite get it. And naming your organization for a satanic demon figure out of Egyptian mythology didn't cause problems at all, right? So he wants to skirt around that. And again, this is his bizarre thinking that really doesn't make any sense. So, and let's get into his basic philosophy, which I don't think I've kept, I haven't clarified for those who are following this. His basic philosophy is about the OU, the objective universe of matter and energy. And then there's the other dimension, which is of sentient intelligence. He likes to use all these big words and quote other people. Boring. So the whole idea is that the objective, or SU universe, there's the OU, the objective, which is matter and energy, which is irrefutable, as he puts it. And then there is the basic SU, the subjective universe, meaning how you think and integrate into the bigger real universe, which has endless horizons. Of course, he puts this, and I'll read here, for such isolate intelligence generates its own unique picture of reality, meaning your own subjective universe. Defined by the sentence as subjective universe, or SU. And he likes to abbreviate this, and it gets a little confusing, and what did that mean, etc., instead of spelling it out, but that's another thing he does to show how bad of a writer he is. The OU is seen and interpreted through the lens of the SU, meaning you see the material world the way you want to. But additional SUs can be created completely extemporaneously. So you can create any universe you want. And of course, that's what he's saying. You integrate that, your belief in. Again, this is not very profound or advanced thinking. All he's done is taken this from other people, and he's using his own little goofball words. Very military. Well, let's make an abbreviation for it. So SUs can also be created completely externally. Friedrich Nietzsche's horizon building. Note that. Ooh, how many people here have read Nietzsche? Well, I've read a little bit of Nietzsche. It's hard to get through his garbage. I mean, it's interesting. I like Nietzsche on one way. He's totally, completely misunderstood, was never a Nazi. He wasn't even around when the Nazis took over. A lot of that was done by his sister. I'm assuming she did it to make money and stay alive. But the point is that Nietzsche, who eventually went insane, had some good concepts, and the overman that people understand was just trying to be a higher person instead of being your plumber or going to church. It had nothing to do with some sort of super being. But the point is that how would you know horizon building? Well, you got to read Nietzsche. Excuse me, let me get my smoking jacket and sit in front of the fire and we'll contemplate worthless stuff from a guy who was, over 100 years ago. So the whole idea is we get into all that stuff, we have these problems, and this is the kind of Suto, because he wants to sound intelligent. After all, he's in the military, one of the least intelligent organizations on the planet. And then, of course, he talks about Plato and Pythagoras. And, of course, he doesn't seem to understand much at all about really Egyptian religions or anything else. But basically, he's saying that this book is not about his attack on the Rosicrucians, who kept throwing him out. And, of course, it really is. But it really gets down to, he says that this is a book about religion. And he says that the Rosicrucians state they're non-religious. They're also not even a non-profit, apparently. Which he has a problem with as well. So he goes into this, and he goes, first of all, he goes to the Luxor Hotel in Las Vegas. When it apparently first opened, and he said it had a great Egyptian theme to it. And the guy who built that was, again, these stories just go on and on. And he went there, when it opened initially. Now, I've been and stayed in that hotel 2 or 3 days, and it is a magnificent pyramid, and the hotel is a very cool hotel, even though it is very Pseudo-Egyptian, meaning that there are a lot of Egyptian stuff around, but it's not really part of it. He says at one time it was much more Egyptian, and they had artifacts, etc. in there. Basically, it's just a casino that is shaped like a pyramid, and the rooms you go up to as you sleep in the actual rooms. I didn't do any actual energetic testing in the hotel at that time, but of course the elevators do go up the pyramid, and because the pyramid's on a slant, they have to go on a slant. So this was quite a little engineering breakthrough, or cost them a fortune. They also have a giant light that shoots up into space as coming out of the top of the pyramid. I think I was told that cost $100,000 a month to run. What a waste of electricity to shoot a beam into space like that. Certainly is impressive to look at, but what a... I would think you should turn that light off, maybe put a couple of candles up there, and lower the price of your hotel rooms. So the whole idea is that it is impressive. It has a Sphinx out in front. So it is quite an impressive thing. Probably the only thing in Vegas that really is impressive, because everything else that they have copied is kind of laughable. When you put something up that looks like a giant structure and it's not a giant structure, it's kind of like a Tinker Toy. So I was never impressed with much of Vegas's stuff in general. While it's fun to go there, it's not really impressive compared to so many other things. So that his worldview is that. So you create anything you want, it intermixed with the real world, and that's it. But of course, that's what everybody says anyway. And of course, there is the other aspects, or the Nekaru, as he calls, which are the gods, and these gods you can tap into their energies and use them. And he recommends people study the Egyptian god forms and learn that religion. So he's telling people to go to religion, learn the religion as in these books, and again, it goes against his law, because he really doesn't believe it. He believes in higher consciousness, is what he really says. They do worship Set, but they're not worshiping a physical entity. They're worshiping a concept. Another one of his twisted ways of looking at things to fit into his own consciousness, so he doesn't get caught being told that, this is kind of silly if you're praying to any gods. Yet, as I said, he had no problem for over 10 years to follow a very simplistic and goofy system, otherwise known as the Church of Satan, by a guy who copied books who did much of nothing. And a very strange guy. I got to remember, Michael Aquino claims he doesn't drink, he doesn't smoke, and he basically has little to no sex, except with his one partner, whoever that is at the time. He's even claimed he's only had sex with 2 different women, his first wife who died from illness, and his second wife who's still alive. Claimed he's never had it with anybody else. I mean, that is quite strange. Yet he talks about the frolicking and the basically sexual ways that were going on at the Church of Satan, which must have some appeal. The only appeal that the Church of Satan ever had was the fact that let's get horny and take drugs. Let's have orgies. Let's have, it's a place you can go see a nude woman there. And I don't know how much you charge to get in or what, but if you're going to offer sex and drugs, or even show of sex and drugs, you're going to get followers, but you're never going to get enough, and those people are cheap. They don't pay for anything in the long run, and he found that out. And I'll get into the Church of Satan and Anton LaVey as well. So the whole idea is that this is where he. So I mean, that's his stuff, and he goes into it. And here we go. Aristotle famously argued the existence of prime movers, primum movens. He did. Oh my. Let's have a crumpet. So it's the same old story. He wants to talk about things that you're supposed to be this well-read pseudo-intellectual like him. I guess he did that in between torturing and murdering as the military man that he is. I've always had problems. Your job is to murder people for political ideas. Don't give me your philosophy. So this is the whole idea that goes with these people, what's going on. So he talks about how wonderful the Luxor is. And as I said, I've already kind of covered that. And then he moves into AMORC, the Rosicrucians, and more. These people were a particular group of Rosicrucians. And there's a whole history of that. I'm not going to go into that. I don't know if anybody really cares. I certainly don't care what their history is. If you like their stuff and look at it and whatever, I mean, everybody should be reading everything they can, but you read with one eye closed, one ear stuffed with wax, and that's the way you do things. Meaning the fact you don't take this in as God's law or this is fact. It's somebody's opinion, and you have to find, as a person who's on a higher path and has trained yourself, you want to find the good stuff, use it, and throw away all of the garbage. So it's all about cutting the fat away. So he goes and he talks about that hotel endlessly, of how wonderful it was at one time and how it went down from there, and so forth. So, and then goes into, of course, with all this stuff as usual. And he's got another guy of his organization, just for those looking for names and stuff. It's always nice to see who's involved in some of these things. But, I mean, he's a fantasist. The guy's a fantasist again. It's always the same old thing with him of going into these comic book realities from H.P. Lovecraft. Anybody who seriously studies Lovecraft and tries to apply these fictional demons is a boob. And there are people that spend all their time doing this. Now, it was a popular thing. People liked it. As I said, we even had a unique book on that, one of the first of its type. The Necronomicon workbook or whatever. And it was a fun little book to go with something that everybody was interested in. I've never used that system, never found it interesting or valid. Everybody said it worked great. But then when I looked into it, after saying, well, I guess it works, everybody says it does. After looking into it, all those people who said it worked were all a bunch of losers, and it didn't work for them. And this is one of the problems with any kind of research and everything else that goes with it, is the fact that where is it coming from? Who is stating that? And can they have anything? So there is a James C. Kirby. He's one of the people that is involved in the Temple of Set. I believe he was involved in the Trapezoid Order as well. They're all there, and they all tend to be Texans. That'll tell you something as well. Just like Edred Thorson, Webb, both of these people are Flowers, as his real name is, are Texans again. And that'll tell you something right from the start. So, Then he goes into the fact that he joined the Rosicrucian order here, paid his fee, went online, and people, they kept throwing him. The bottom line, without going into the details, they kept throwing him out. They didn't like the fact that he went into forums or monopolized them, talked, so forth. And he states that, well, I mean, they state that they are not a religion and that anybody that goes there, no matter what belief they have, is welcome because they are not a religion. But I'm not sure that pertains to Satanists. I think what they mean by any religion is any positive religion. So I'm assuming anybody who's negative, who went into their organization and they didn't consider them positive, would have thrown them out as I would do. If you get involved with me and I find that you're involved in negative organizations, I'm not going to have anything to do with you. I'm not going to arm you. I'm not going to train you if you're a person who is ultimately using stuff for bad. So once they found out who he was, they eventually kept throwing him out. So needless to say, he was very upset at this. And that's why he wrote this whole little book here. This is his response, I'm going to go after the Rosicrucians and point out all their little problems because I'm perfect. Because we know the Temple of Sat is perfect. And there's nothing going on there. They've achieved absolutely nothing. They have pretty much, and I'm going to review his books on the Temple of Sat. But, you never get anything from these people. If they have anything, it's kept very close to them, and it's never revealed. I've read the outer type books, everything from their S&M books written by Edred Flowers, which says nothing. It's down to basically you could take his S&M book and read it to 6-year-olds. There's nothing there. And they're very aware of that. And I don't think they really know anything. As I said, Edred Flowers' books, as far as I'm concerned, are nothing more than copies of the German books that he went over there in between his S&M fun parties, got this information, joined the Black Orders over there, and made sure that he took their information. And then when people objected, I believe ultimately he had problems with the 18 runes done by the Armenians, because the Armenians own that, and they told him, don't publish that, you have no right to, and he never did. Tried to get that book, he was going to publish it, but never did. But it's just a copy, he's got nothing new. There's no concepts from any of these people that are new. And if someone doesn't have answers, if they don't have new information, it means they're not connected to Gnosis or Christ consciousness. And again, let's remember, this is the solar Christ, the not Jesus-ism. Jesus was the Christ, and the Christ means this solar Christ, a person who's reached a state of Gnosis. So he's thrilled that he got this paid-for fantasy certificate with his name on it and has it posted in the beginning of the book here. It's just kind of jokey. That's what you consider? So, he certainly didn't complete any courses in any other occult places that I'm aware of. He went to schools that are not metaphysical occult based and then trying to say, well, these gave me. No, you got a political science master's degree from a school. That's all you got, which is you got dumbadamia's garbage. And of course, you think that has value. After all, I got the little certificate. So, without getting into the OU and SU, which I've described here, that's pretty much his actual reality to it. So he goes in there and he talks about it. That, and of course, he thinks that why he hasn't spent more time in Egypt and researching those things, I have no idea. But he really hasn't. I don't really think he has much of an interest there. He's trying to, again, put himself on a higher level because the Egyptians are thought to be very sophisticated. And of course, they were very genius. If you track anything back, it generally goes back to the Egyptians were doing it. From making beer to brain surgery, the Egyptians invented it. And it pretty much can be gone back to that, which is this strange group of people that popped up from nowhere, who are these semi-Caucasian Mediterraneans, who are the, quote, Egyptians in those areas there. So there's a whole area of the Middle East there that is what is generally thought of as Arab, but Arab is not what the people from the Middle East call themselves, except for some people. We consider them Arabs when they're really Middle Easterners, which cover places like Iraq, Iran, Egypt, etc. Well, these are all, are not technically Arabs, which I guess come from one small area. But they're Middle Easterners, which covers several things there. So he's got pictures of the hotels. I mean, he's got some good pictures in here if you're interested. The light I was talking about on top of that hotel is 40 billion candle xenic bulb light visible for 250 miles away in Los Angeles. I don't know how true that is. I never really saw that from Los Angeles when I lived there. It's one of the few things you can see from space other than the Great Wall. It's super expensive, and of course, as he said, he's got some nice color pictures in here if you want to see what it looks like. But you can go online and get lots of very interesting pictures of that if you desire. So he talks about that. Then he moves into the Rosicrucians, which of course he wants to tell them how. As he has a chapter here, Chapter 2, Egypt in San Jose, California. So, and he has a picture of the facilities there from above, which shows you there are many buildings, there are parks, they have a labyrinth there. It's quite a beautiful little area, and one of the things I regret never going to, and I'm not sure why I didn't, but San Jose is really, there's nothing there, but of course there's the Winchester Mystery House not too far from there. But it's south of San Francisco, so I guess you could have people could have went there. It's quite a beautiful place, and it's got some really beautiful architecture. They have an Egyptian museum. They have a public library of occult books. They have the Rosy Cross University building, which is where their teaching is from. A labyrinth made with California native plants. And then he goes into their philosophy and the problems he's had. But since they threw him out and everything else, he's got nothing but bad stuff to say in general. So he doesn't like their symbols. He doesn't like what the Rosy Cross and the cross means, saying that's these symbols are commonly used. Of course, they have reasons for it, and they use those symbols, and the meanings they have for them are theirs, not necessarily universally thought of, and you have to understand that. You know, that's why you have to be careful picking symbols as well. So if you pick a certain symbol, you're going to then have to clarify it and everything that goes with that, and that's something that has problems there. But they have this, you know, it is a great facility with all these things that he went to and spent some time there, apparently, got into all the places like he does. He has time and money. Of course, San Jose is not far from San Francisco. I'm not sure if it's an hour, 2-hour drive down there from where he lives, where he lived in San Francisco. And he talks about, I'm not going to go into all the details here, so this already went too long here, but he goes in and say, well, you should use this symbol instead of the rose and the cross. You should use this ankh and this other things. And I don't really like his symbols either. I mean, that's up to them. That's their organization, and you should understand what those symbols mean per that organization, not in general. But he seems to have problems with that as well. He uses a lot of goofy symbols and has no problem being involved with very evil organizations and worshiping evil people, which is what he does, not even going past the fact of, you can't stop him from referencing Nazis, all of the Germanic, or we should say, which are really Deutsche-manic, Islamic systems that he thinks somehow doesn't even quite understand the history and philosophy of where that goes back to. So all of that's included in that. He jumped, but you can't. And of course, he's constantly attacking the Jews, and you have to look at this of how he's very negative to them as well. So he's got this very typical thing. His mother was in Nazi Germany studying art when it was at its highest level in the mid-30s. Something's going on here. There's a giant Nazi connection, as well physically, not just his reality. He's got a very strange in general. He likes to stay to some degree, even though we have very little information on him. His father apparently was with Patton's Third Army. He got it and everything else. But it's okay if they shoot Daddy. We still love them. They're good people. So the whole idea is this is the kind of thing that you run into with his back and forth confusion, which is pretty much his entire way of looking at the world. It's very, very confused, moving in and out from his pseudo-intellectual quoting of Nietzsche and Aristotle and everybody else. Sorry, dropped off there. But the whole idea is this is very typical. And of course, let's not forget quotes from the Nazis and everything else that goes there, since he's preoccupied with them, and there's not a single thing you're going to ever read that doesn't have his references there, which is always amusing because when they raided his house looking for things, they conveniently didn't find his Nazi dagger, or did he know they were coming? Because they didn't find much of anything there. At least that wasn't stated in his book. The guy didn't have a gun. Well, whatever. They found Daddy's Nazi flag and medals, which he made sure they'd find, because after all, that makes him look cool. So the whole idea is that we just don't know what's going on there, but we're trying to piece together who this guy is. So he goes and talks about religion. He says they claim they're not religious, they're not a 501c, they should be a 501. He's telling them what business structure they should have. They should be a nonprofit because he's a nonprofit. I think the simple set is. So it's all the stuff that he wants to tell everybody, what symbols they should use, etc., because he knows so much about their organization because he read about it. And this is so typical of him when he's really put together much of nothing. And his literature, which is apparently kept to his select group of people that join the organization, says actually losing nothing. And he claims that the Orc is a hybrid of Western Jewish lineages coupled together with Hindu karmic-based earthly reincarnation. It goes into reincarnation and other things he doesn't. He's got a lot of strange things, just like he does not believe in psychic powers exist. He doesn't believe that there is anything such as psychic powers, that everything is based in the electromagnetic spectrum, and you as a human entity don't produce enough electromagnetic energy to do anything. And of course, that's a bad way of even looking at electromagnetic energy, but as I've stated in the past, psychic power is not electromagnetic in nature. It's been proven from all the research that it doesn't really have that kind of spectrum to it. It doesn't work like electromagnetism. So people get psychic messages that are in Faraday cages that stop all electromagnetic fields from entering. So the whole idea is that this is a known fact, but he doesn't get that, and since he apparently was pushed out of government programs, totally disses them. So I don't know what the connection is there, but his buddies like the General Alexander, who's known for his Stargate and other collusion and non-lethal weapons, as they call them, which he claims is a good buddy of his. Well, nobody's ever mentioned him, and I've listened to their interviews, and he was never mentioned in Stargate programs or anything else. I would like to talk to some of the people in those programs if they even heard of this guy, and did he ever show up? Because I think he did show up, but I don't think he was taken seriously. I don't know what the full story there is, but it's interesting. But he's made sure, even though he went to Esalen Institute, another San Francisco or lower San Francisco, I think they're in Big Sur or someplace, but it's Northern California, below or slightly above San Francisco. I'm not sure where Esalen is. But they translated all the data that the Russians had talking about all their psychic and psychotronic experiments. And this one went in one ear and out the other because it was nothing he was interested in. So it shows it's a bad researcher and he doesn't understand the nature of metaphysical energies, the the subtle energy physics of things. And of course, nobody really understands that. It's talked about in many ways, but until I get my book out defining this, nobody really knows what it is and how it works, which I have completely figured out, tested, and know works. But he doesn't get any of this. I doubt he would be open to any of this. He's very set in his ways because he knows what he's doing. And as a military officer who apparently doesn't have to report to anybody else per se, is able to do his tyrannical systems. But of course, he's totally free being a military officer to do what he wants in the realm of what is the higher, better self, because that's what you do as a military officer. You don't follow orders. What you do is what you're told to do, and that is the best that can happen. So, I mean, it's kind of comical that you could say you're a free individual when you're working in the most disciplined, enslaved area you could possibly be in, which is the military. So, he talks about all the things you should do, and they have their systems and how he renames it and how really it's just a Jewish plot. Really, that's what he's saying. And of course he was thrown out. He went back in again a year or two later, and he keeps getting thrown out. And the minute they discover him, they generally don't do it. And of course he says, well, I mean, you could be any religion you want. They're not a religion. Why are they targeting me? Well, for obvious reasons, they're targeting you and your belief systems. And I'm not sure where that ended up. I don't know if he went in there, but they did throw him out for monopolizing blogs and comment groups, so they claim. And he probably did. He's going to, when he makes comments, he's going to follow up on it. And since he was thrown out, he has this vendetta against them. But it shows you the kind of childish and pseudo-intellectual mind this guy has, that he has to go after this organization. He wants to change them. He wants to mold them into what he thinks is right. Well, he's put together a copied organization from information is non-existent. There's virtually nothing known about Egyptian mythology, gods, and practices. It just isn't there. And he stated this himself. You had to piece everything together, just like the Golden Dawn did. There's no Golden Dawn system. This was pieced together. And of course, that's how life is, especially when things are thousands of years ago, because there really isn't any stream of consistent information. Every culture comes along and destroys the other. And when the Muslim culture took over Egypt, well, they tried to destroy a lot of the ancient Egyptian relics that are there now in recent years. So all of this is as the Spanish, which are basically Muslims, because Spain was occupied by the Muslims for 800 years. When they went over to the Mayans and everything else, they destroyed all their writings. And there were probably millions of books and carvings that they burnt over there when then. And there must have been a lot of stuff saved and hidden in caves and everything else, but we don't hear of any of that, which is interesting in itself as well. So he goes in and tells everybody he doesn't like their symbol because he doesn't like the rose means this and the cross means that. All the things, so he's going to tell them how to run their organization. Now, he didn't bother taking his millions and building a Set temple. He didn't decide to do any of that. Why didn't he build a Set temple somewhere? He had the money. He has the real estate. He could have sunk quite a bit of money into that, but he didn't. And we know he has lots of money. Now, certainly a military officer doesn't have gobs of money, but they are very well off, and they have excellent retirement, and they have excellent pay. But this is more than that. The bottom line is that he didn't want to use the Temple of Set for finances, but that's bogus. He could never make money off the Temple of Set. There's no following there, and you can't make money unless you're going to really be based in doing that, which he didn't want to do and could care less because he had lots of money in the bank. He had his own homes, he had his own cars, he has this big salary, and all the things that go with it. So he wasn't in any way trying to help Anton LaVey with any of their stuff. So the whole idea is that Anton LaVey he was lucky because Mommy and Daddy left him that house he was living in, which has been destroyed and removed, obviously. And now there's a condo there, which is interesting. I wonder if anything goes on there. Probably not. It's amazing how these places don't have activity where you think they would. But the bottom line is that Anton LaVey had nothing. And the only reason he was able to survive, particularly in San Francisco, a very expensive area even to rent, was the fact that mommy and daddy gave him a house, which eventually was stolen by his ex-wife, or at least some of it was. Somebody came forward and bought his wife out so he could stay in that house, at least until death. I don't know where it went to after that. But that's the reason he was able to survive and stay in the same house he had, was the fact of the matter of that mommy and daddy left it to him. Again, one of those things that me, Satan, is me manifest what? Cardboard box on street? Yeah, that's what you manifest. The fact that Hollywood didn't embrace him and pay him millions because he was the great Satanist, he became very disillusioned, as Hollywood does to everybody, use and abuse you and throw you out. Or I should say, not only Hollywood, but most life and companies do the same thing. So the whole idea is that's what he said here. There's really nothing here if you want to. So it's his opinion. That's what this book is all about. And he's trying to say that this is his comment on religion. And he does go into religion and talk about it. And, his books are very repetitive. He talks about all the same thing. He talks about his worldview. And the fact is that you should be studying the Egyptian god system, not the Rosicrucians, and what's going there. And, of course, there's nothing practical. And, of course, you can't use any meditations or psychic stuff because none of that really exists. The only thing that exists is the electromagnetic, and of course his god forms, which is ultimately, when you get down to it, he doesn't believe in any god forms. He worships basically a higher state, or to a certain extent you could call it that. He is worshiping a gnosis, or higher states of consciousness, is what he really says, and whether and he thinks that is embodied by the ancient symbol of Set. And of course, all of these old religions were very much city-based, area-based, and while gods were followed for some times and then not others, practices to them were the same. But the Egyptians were very, very pagan. They had lots of blood rituals, sacrifices. They were all interbred. So it was a very strange society, although apparently because of their... And, of course, everything they did was based on death. It was all about them dying and then going somewhere else and living forever. So, basically, the Egyptians are all based on that. They had a certain military prowess to keep their empire going, but were eventually beaten. And where was Set? Protecting his people. They were beaten by the Greeks and the Romans, who occupied them for many hundreds of years. I think the Greeks and Romans occupied Egypt for almost 1,000 years. I'm not entirely sure there, but at least it's 800. The timeline, what happens with those things in general. So I'm not really sure how, but they were there for hundreds of years, the Greeks, and they took on a lot of their culture, they took their information, they took their mathematics, and that's why Greece shot up. And of course, Greece modified it as the Romans modified it, and took, I would say, much more practical, quote, Western ways, and used them at a higher level on a physical. I mean, you can't beat Roman architecture and engineering as you can't beat Greek, ultimately. Certainly, the Egyptians did some amazing things and built some amazing structures that were basically from the older kingdoms that were more connected to, quote, Atlantean-type energies, and had the greatest societies then. So all of that is part of the amazingness of Egypt. That entire country is just littered with buildings and everything else from 1 square foot to another. They find one after another there, and that entire country should be spending their entire time in archaeological builds that the West and others should be supporting, and this should be part of their country. But the problem is they are stuck in Islamic viewpoints, so they consider this to be evil and not part of Allah, while like everything in the world, if you believe in any God, well, God created these energies and wanted man to discover them. Only the primitive, ignorant, born-againer type mind demonizes high technologies and advancements, which have to come from what if you're religious? Well, they would have to come from God. So, but it's a usual mishmash of nonsense here, thrown together in his typical writing system. And he repeats the same thing, the outer universe and the subjective universe. This is his big thing. and talks about this endlessly and how it relates to the fact that, if you're into Rosicrucianism and Egyptian belief systems, well, you should be going back to the original god forms, and which he doesn't even mention, because the names they're using are Greek names. They're not really Egyptian names. People don't know that, but things like Ra and Osiris and other things come from the Greeks. The word pyramid is a Greek name, which was a cake that looked like the pyramid. So the Greeks named the pyramids, it looks like a Twinkie. So the whole idea is, was that Greek? But that's how they named the pyramids. And of course, the Egyptian gods are not the Egyptian names. They are the Greek names for the Egyptian gods, and which goes on. So, so if you look at the leadership, particularly through certain aspects of Egypt, they are very diffused. People think they loved well. They didn't love. They were very sexist, and which goes through their entire belief system. They are all interbred. They had all sorts of problems. So the whole idea is some of their period of time of Egypt, they were at peace, I believe, for many, many years, could be hundreds of years, and they were able to put these things together with the guidance of a very advanced priesthood who apparently knew what they were doing, and of course being able to take the entire citizenry and put them to work on stuff like this. And building an entire society based on these builders and everything else, which weren't slaves. They must have been a high class of people that were there to do all this labor and be able to manufacture, pour the cement, which a lot of people think that's how a lot of these structures were made, or ways of cutting things, etc. All of that was eventually done by this which we have no idea how they were done today. We have things that are kind of left over, but that's another subject I don't want to diverse on too much. So, if you want a slanted viewpoint of Rosicrucianism, or just to find out Aquino's kind of take on religion, well, this book is another one of his reads. Remember, you can get this on Kindle Unlimited, which is only $10 a month. So you can read all of his books, if you want to go through them quickly, probably in a month or two. So at the most, it costs you $20 to read everything that he's put out there and to see the photos and everything, which some of them are good. He has photos in some of his books of his father, his mother. He talks about it. So he's taken his life and kind of moved them through his books. And I think he's done this deliberately as a way to sell his books. So if you want to find out or have a picture of his father in uniform, well, you can find that in one of his books. But he doesn't give you any details on his investment broker. Is that what the term he used? Father. We don't know really what he did. And we don't know really what his mother did, other than being an artistic type who apparently was very intelligent. But you got to remember, these artistic types that are intelligent, that go through colleges at very young ages, as she went through Stanford in 3 years, from at the age of 14 to 17, quite an accomplishment, are all goofy. She's not doing 14-year-old things. She's doing adult things. And who is she relating to? And who is she dating? What is her sexual involvements at 14? Well, certainly, I don't know how many people are going to jump into that, but as the old cliche goes, 14 gets you 20. So the whole idea is, I don't know what she was doing in college and how that shaped her life and so forth. The family is weird. His grandfather, or the people who came to America first before his father and his mother, his father came over here and was looking around to establish himself in America, and his mother was over in northern Italy humping the priest, and the priest then became buddies of the family. So this is pretty weird stuff that you get into. The fact is it just shows you the kind of way that Christianity is looked at, particularly the Catholic Church, and I think that most priests are probably sexually involved one way or another. I don't think that any of these priests are very celibate, except a very select few, and it's unnatural and perverted to be. But the fact is that your mother would get involved with a priest. But of course, it's different in Italy because people all know that, and people all know the priest is screwing around, and it's probably considered an honor. But to take that into your family, and now he's a friend. Mama, he is a priest, a friend. You were humping for years in Italy. Let's invite him to dinner. So the whole idea is that we get all this nonsense that goes on here. So you got to remember, this is the kind of weird stuff that was started by Granddad. And his family, which we don't know really what daddy did, investments, what does that mean? That could mean anything. Was he selling drugs? No, I'm just kind of making that as a humor, so I have no idea. But what does investments mean? Was he a stockbroker and made lots of money? He certainly was able to live in a fancy place called Santa Barbara, which has always been expensive, even on California terms. And mommy apparently was able to, came from a wealthy background and had money as well. Was that where the money come from? So we just don't know. It's always nice to know these things to kind of figure it out because that shapes your worldview. One of the things is that he doesn't seem to have any understanding of how money works in politics or anything else. He doesn't understand that. His talking about and his statements on political issues he's done on actual interview shows is really kind of base level ignorance. You can't get something for nothing. Well, nobody's saying getting stuff from nothing, but maybe we should cut your military salaries so that, and of course take money from the military so we can fund other things, which basically he's in favor of. But his statements about things and Bernie Sanders, where he was making statements against, saying that he was going to give people stuff that there is no free lunch. Well, of course there's no free lunch. The entire world finances medical except the United States. So the whole idea is there's certainly gobs of money that could be shifted into the things that people need so their lives aren't traumatized. He doesn't understand that because he lived in basically the bosom of the United States taxpayers getting everything free. And that's what you get in the military. You can even go back on base when you're retired and buy stuff at the PX so you don't pay taxes and get discounts on them. You get free medical care. You get a huge retirement policy. Michael, baby, that's called socialism. And you're basically nothing more than a communist, if you really want to get down to it. A military right, actually left-wing as the communists and Nazis are, left-wing communist believer living in a communist system saying you can't get something from nothing. That's right, and all you military flakes that have been stealing money from the American people should not be getting the perks you're getting, especially since you haven't won a war since your inception. So the whole idea is that all of this stuff he doesn't get. So this is the kind of bizarre stuff that you run into. Now, the problem is when someone takes into his bosom horrible, torturous murders and wants possession of theirs in the mystical fantasy illusion that this was some sort of pagan group of people. And I used to think that as well. And of course, most people don't get that are in his generation and mine, of the fact that this was just a war and we have them all the time and these were just war. Well, it's not the case of the German Deutsche Empire, who has been affecting the world for over 200 years, murdering and torturing. And of course, World War II was the accumulation of that and their ultimate spinning. Now, I'm not going to get into all those things now, but a guy who claims he's so well read that he knows what's going on is living in a fantasy just like he thinks H.P. Lovecraft stuff was real. Well, he doesn't say it's real, and he says the Necronomicon is not real. It's a made-up book by Herman Slater's publishing company, whoever that author Simon was. He does state that, but he still gets involved with bogus literature and thinks it's amusing. Well, I don't think it's amusing, and I think it hurts your credibility. Now, if you want to go into concepts like Jedis and other things, well, that's a different concept. You're not talking about the fantasy. You're talking about the concept of a spiritual, empowered being that has abilities. It's different than talking about things like Lovecraft and all of his Cthulhu stuff and what all that nonsense is. So all of this is the very typical diffused and confused reality that you get from him. We will be reviewing, I think it's We Break the Sword, which is a fictionalized book by him that uses his principles from Mind Wars to solve problems. And that one problem that would have been solved by his Mind War book is, guess what? World War II, and he talks about it and how everything would have been wonderful if they would have used his principles, which I find kind of juvenile and childish. There's really nothing there. I don't know what he's talking about using his principles here of some sort of mind psyops thing on everybody so people are happy and don't kill each other. I think that it's a fantasy, and that's never happened, and generally people always talk before starting wars, and it does absolutely nothing because your enemy or yourself is not going to agree. He's saying we should agree, come to an agreement, and that everything would be fine. Everything would be Twinkies and milk and beautiful world because we'd all agree and we'd be able to do this using psyop techniques and nobody would fight, but everybody would be happy. I think that is such a childish, imbecilic way of looking at things that it's very, very hard to take him seriously when he thinks he has found the answer. Everything is about that. Everything's about the objective universe and the subjective universe. This is all the same thing and that you can make any... Well, the point is if you can make anything happen in the subjective universe, well, that means that your enemies want to eliminate you in their subjective universe. What do you do about that, Mikey? Well, you start a war. So, it's all very, very interesting. He's also stated who killed JFK, which I have stated in other lectures, and I will state in many lectures. He's also stated that he is trying to warn people that the next big move by what's happening with society, and he did this just before his death a couple of years ago, is that the next move out there will be a world war. And it's interesting how that seems to be happening now, because that's what they're trying to do to solve problems. And of course, that's what all wars are about. They're economic boosters at the price of a lot of dead and scarred people, which nobody really cares about anyway, because they're generally not people in the elite. So this is interesting, and I do think that he has inside knowledge to a degree. He tends to be against the system, so he claims, which is why he's been targeted, labeled, and everybody sees him behind every rock, which I do tend to believe. I don't think he was connected to these type of pedophile realities that people want to label him. I think he's an scapegoat, and I'm always searching to find out, well, can we find more of it? The fact that you said you saw this guy means nothing. And since all of these sources of information are contrived, monitored, and put together, we can't really know. And there are no people investigating this to any great degree. There was a couple of, I don't know how honest they were, but honest cops, the FBI and another detective from New York, and they got a lot wrong. And they get information from people that go to them because they know they're a source, and they claim the same thing again because they want the same scapegoats to be blamed for everything, while the bad guys keep doing their things. So this is the problem when you have very low level and unorganized, unfunded investigators. So this is what we have in general. And you can't trust anybody out there. Information is warped through everybody's little funnel and screen and filters. This is what happens with everybody. I only found a couple of people that seem to get it out there. There's a new guy out there I will be talking about soon. We've talked about Jimmy Dore, the comic political commentator, which seemed to have got things right. So there's a few of these people out there that seem to be telling the truth, and it's logically proven and so forth. And there's a few other people out there, and I've actually found a researcher that seems to get it and understand that everything is contrived, and he isn't looking for answers to fulfill what he believes, because he doesn't have beliefs in everything. He's looking at the facts of it. So this is very good, and I'll let you know about this guy and his information. And I have as well solved the Process Church mystery, so to speak, and I will be talking about that soon. So I hope everybody's enjoyed this, and more commentary in this area on this interesting person. And I think it's an important person because we can't study people in this field very well. There's not too many people that are public out there. Anton LaVey is gone, has been for many years. I'm not sure we got anything out of him. This is the only guy who's really public, writes a lot of things out there, etc. There are other groups. There's the Satanic Temple. These are other people who are very active recently, and to different degrees. But this is certainly a fascinating guy because of his particular position and what has been happening to him and so forth. And certainly, now that he has passed about 2 years ago, it's interesting to look back at his information and where he was coming from and see if we can find any links here. As I said, I personally do not think all these claims against him are real. There's lots of people that do that. I'm not sure whether they are programmed to do this, whether they are doing it to boost their credibility, because that's what people do. They're going to boost their credibility by saying it was Aquino who was there when there's virtually no proof of that. It's just one person's statement. And I can tell you right now, that is not good enough. And I don't care whether they tell police or not. There's huge amounts of information written on me that are complete and total lies done by criminals who have been working against me and my family for years. So this is all fraud by people that claim this, and they write what they want. And they're all criminals. Most of them are Satanists. They're government-based as well. And this is done from a nobody. To harass me is kind of a joke. So the whole idea is that all of this is what's going on. So should we believe anybody else? Hell no. Until next time.